Welcome to the committee. Thank you for subbing in today. Go ahead, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. C'est un vrai plaisir pour moi.
It truly is a pleasure to be able to sit at the table this morning, and I'd like to welcome the Minister responsible for Quebec and the Government House Leader. Madam Chair, the Minister forgot two very important points in his opening remarks. He forgot to say that everything that the Prime Minister said in his throne speech, he could have said through a statement to the House of Commons. Why? Because there was nothing new that deserved a prorogation and a new throne speech, rather. The government, as it said itself, was already working to resolve the issues related to the pandemic, so there was no reason to prorogue. He could have made a statement to the House. Now, why didn't he do that? Well, let's just remember, Madam Chair, what was happening. On the 19th of August, the Committee on Ethics that was looking into the WE scandal was supposed to listening to the Speaker's spotlight. Now, they were responsible for contracts with We Charity and with the personal family of the Prime Minister. The representative was supposed to appear on the 19th, and just by coincidence, it was on the 18th that there was a decision to dissolve Parliament. Why? Well, Speaker Spotlight said that they had been in discussions with the Prime Minister's family, and I'd like to know if the Minister was aware of the discussions between Speaker Spotlight and the family of the Prime Minister. Madam Chair, you won't be surprised to learn that I am not in agreement with the premise of what my colleague is saying. I do welcome him here to the committee. It's a pleasure to see him. But I said earlier, and the Prime Minister said at the time, that all of government, not just the political side of the government, all government, public servants, had to focus on the pandemic. It was the greatest public health crisis since the Spanish flu. It was the greatest economic crisis in about 100 years. And so we had to do that. Now, we all belong to different parties. Obviously, we read events differently. Well, my question is a little more specific than that, Minister. I'm asking if you were aware of the discussions between Speaker Spotlight and Trudeau's family, yes or no? Well, Madam Chair, my colleague from the opposition is asking me specific questions on items I have no idea of. Well, if you weren't aware then, should the Prime Minister be appearing before this committee if you're not able to speak to this? Well, I'm very pleased to be here today, Mr. Deltell, on behalf of the government. I'm speaking on behalf of the government. I'm speaking on behalf of all our colleagues. I'm the one who was able to table the report in the House. I'm sure you read it. And that's the reason why I'm here today, to listen to your questions. Well, if you're speaking on behalf of the government, I'm here to speak on prorogation. And Mr. Deltell, if you're asking me to speak to the prorogation report, I expect questions on that. Well, the reason there was prorogation was because Speaker Spotlight was supposed to testify on the 19th. And I'd like to know if the Prime Minister had any influence over these decisions and discussions. Well, Madam Chair, we have two different visions. Well, to help you answer, you've spoken about transparency. Are you willing to table before this committee all exchanges that took place between the Prime Minister's office and anyone else on prorogation? Are you willing to table those documents? The committee can ask for whatever it wants. Then I'm asking you if you're open to that. Mr. Deltell, this isn't a court. We're speaking amongst colleagues, and I think we should be speaking about prorogation. Yes, and you're not able to tell me what the Prime Minister's influence was. I'm helping you think about this, and I'm asking you to table all documents, all memos, emails, texts between your office and the Prime Minister's office on prorogation. Are you willing to go through that transparency exercise, yes or no? Mr. Deltell. There's enormous amount of work that has been done by this committee. Yes or no, says Mr. Deltell. Many of your colleagues have done a considerable amount of work. They've heard from experts, academics, and that is what has led up to my presence here today to speak about prorogation. Canadians want to know what the Prime Minister's role was in the decision on prorogation. He announced it, but what led to it? That's what we want answers on. And perhaps it could help you, and what could help Canadians would be if you were to table all emails, texts, and anything else that took place between your office and the Prime Minister's office. Are you willing to be that transparent, yes or no? Mr. Deltell, you're talking about what could help Canadians understand why we prorogued? Well, I've just explained this to you. So you're saying no? Is that what you're saying? You're not willing to table these documents? Mr. Deltell, I've explained to you the reasoning behind the government's decision, and I'm speaking on behalf of the government. I tabled the report in the House on behalf of the government, and I think it's a very serious document. And Mr. Deltell, this has never happened before in history. Your own government prorogued with no reason whatsoever more than once.
Rodriguez, that's all the time we have. Monsieur Lezon, 6 minutes, please.
Else underlying this, and you don't want to talk about it. This doesn't work.
Blaikie for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. You've said a few times now that the prorogation was necessary so that the government could work on the speech. So I'm just wondering, how many people were all working on this speech? And, what do you think government would, what jobs would government have been doing if Parliament was sitting that it didn't do during prorogation? Because what I'm hearing is that proroguing meant that the government was off the hook for all sorts of work that otherwise would have kept it so busy that it couldn't have written a half-hour speech. So what were the things that government wasn't doing while prorogation was in effect such that you were able to commit so much time and resources to this apparently momentous speech?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Blaikie, and also thank you for the work for your party in this crisis, because we were able, and as I said to Mr. Terrien and Mr. Deltell, to work together to help Canadians, and that included all of you guys. We needed to send a clear message that the government was fully concentrating all its efforts on this, clear message to the population, clear message to all the public servants. We needed that reset so we can focus, so we could consult, because there's been also a lot of consultation, and that takes time. It doesn't take 3 days.
Indeed it does. So what is the work that your government did not perform that it otherwise would have done if there had been no prorogation? Because what you're telling me is that prorogation let you off the hook from certain kinds of work in order to focus on a speech from the throne. So what work was it that you weren't doing as a result of prorogation that gave you so much more time that you're telling us was needed in order to get a speech from the throne right? What were you not doing during prorogation that you would have been doing if the House had been sitting? And incidentally, it was only supposed to sit for 1 day out of that entire period that it was prorogued. So was it just during the sitting day that you guys were working on the speech from the throne and you really needed that time, or were there other days that you weren't doing things that you would have been doing
Mr.
otherwise?
Blaikie, you know that a speech from the throne takes time. It takes time because you're not there sitting by yourself in a room, drafting a few notes. Consult. You go out. You consult. People are on the ground, experts from the business sector, from the social sector.
So during the pandemic response, during the pandemic response, while Parliament was sitting, you weren't consulting with people, because you're telling me you only had time to consult if Parliament's prorogued.
It amplifies
that civic consultation and Parliament sitting are incompatible for your government. Have I got that right?
It amplifies the effort. It puts a focus on what we're doing. It sends a clear message to public servants, to all of us, to everyone, that we're really, really concentrating on that. Through all the discussions also with the provinces, it's, you know what, there's no recipe to manage a crisis, Mr. Blaikie. You know that. Like, when we got there, who knew about COVID-19? No one.
So in what ways was Parliament distracting you from consulting with civil society on the direction that we should be taking? Like, what was the burden you were relieved of in order to be able to focus more on consulting with Canadians, which apparently you hadn't been doing much of prior to prorogation, at least not effectively, which is why you needed the time off from Parliament, if I understand you correctly.
I wouldn't call it distraction, because the work that Parliament does and committee does and you guys in the opposition do is fundamental. So, but what we wanted...
So could we not have continued doing that work while your government consulted?
We did everything we could. Listen, we've been going out for months, sitting down with the opposition, putting, piece here and piece there. I think we needed a clear vision, something more broad, based on consultation, something very, very clear, a path to follow, because again, none of us is an expert in managing a crisis of that size. Of a pandemic.
But did it make sense to take that time while there was a looming deadline for the expiration of CERB and millions of Canadians wondering what was going to happen to their household income, looking to Parliament to be hammering out a solution, and instead seeing that the work of Parliament had stopped in that regard? I mean, couldn't the timing of this have been different? And if your government really felt the need to have a confidence, an expression of confidence by the House, I mean, speech from the throne is not the only tool to do that. I mean, the opposition have been calling for a budget for some time by then, but also there's the option for your government at any time to introduce a motion to the effect of whether or not the House has confidence in the government or not. You don't need a speech from the throne to do it. You don't need a budget to do it. A simple motion would have been good enough. It would have allowed the work of Parliament to continue through the weeks between August 18th and when Parliament went back. I mean, why not those options? Why not test the confidence of the House with a simple motion and then wait for the consultative effort until after we had done right by Canadians and made it clear what would happen on the day that the CERB program expired, instead of leaving it till the 11th hour, which caused a lot of unneeded stress and anxiety for many Canadian families in very difficult positions.
I think, Mr. Blaikie, that getting the confidence of the House on this broad, very detailed program was sending a clear message, and I think that was necessary. And I think that it was definitely the right thing to do.
I just have to disagree that the speech from the throne provided a detailed program. Most of it was a rehash of things we had heard before. The details Canadians were really interested in were the details of what had happened with the We Charity scandal, particularly students.
Thank you, Mr. Blaikie. That's all the time you have. Mr. Nader, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, for joining us. I'm curious, did the government or the Liberal Party undertake any public opinion research informing the decision to prorogue, polling, focus groups, anything of that nature?
I couldn't tell you that. I can tell you that there was clear indications that we really had to focus and reset and make sure that we would build this very comprehensive and detailed plan